Welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm going to show you how to make fresh homemade cinnamon rolls. Now if that sounds good to you, stick around and I'm going to walk you through the entire process. The full recipe is also in the description, so by the time we're done, you'll have all the knowledge you need. Let's get started. We'll first prepare our yeast with 1 teaspoon of sugar and 1/3 of a cup of warm water. Make sure it's not too hot. You should be able to keep your finger submerged in it comfortably. After a quick stir, add your packet of dry active yeast. That would be 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast if you don't have these individual packets. I'll give this a stir as well to make sure everything is mixed together properly. And the yeast have access to all that sugar. Now we'll set it aside for at least 15 minutes. Next we'll move over to the stove where we're going to warm up 1/3 of a cup of butter with 3/4 of a cup of milk, along with 1/3 of a cup of sugar and half a teaspoon of salt. Now we're going to stir this over medium-low heat until the butter melts and the sugar and salt dissolve into the milk. You don't need to boil the milk, so once it looks like this, you can turn off the heat and set it to the side. We'll be using it again in a few minutes. Now that that's done, we can measure out 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and I will then sift that into my standing mixer bowl. Next, grab that warm milk and butter mixture and add that into the flour. Now mix everything together until it's completely combined. You'll end up with a very sticky dough that looks like this. Now get all of that dough off of your spatula and into the bowl. Now I'm going to put the bowl onto the mixer and put on the bread hook attachment. You can do this all by hand, but this of course makes it much easier. Next, add 2 eggs to the mixture, preferably at room temperature, followed by that activated yeast, which should look like this if you've done it right. If you're not seeing all this foam, it could be that your water was too hot or your yeast was expired. And make sure to get almost all of it in there to make sure those rolls really rise. Next, I'll start up the mixer on low speed and slowly add 2 more cups of sifted flour while it's mixing. Do this by adding a small portion of flour, waiting for it to mix in completely, scraping the sides of the bowl when necessary, and continuing from there. When you've added about half of the flour and you're starting to see the dough come together, you can pick up the speed. After a few minutes, once all the flour has been added in, your dough should be looking like this. It'll still be a little bit sticky, but don't worry about that. As you can see, it's really sticking to everything, but that's what we want at the moment. Once I'm finally able to get everything contained, I remove the bowl from the mixer, cover a smooth flat surface with flour, and put the dough on top. Now we're ready to start kneading. Now you should knead the dough for at least 5 minutes, but closer to 10 if you have the time. We will be adding and incorporating more flour into the dough as we go. This will make it less sticky. You should end up with a nice smooth ball of dough like this. Once you're done kneading, take a bowl that's coated with oil and place your dough inside. The dough will be left to rise for about an hour, so cover it with a tea towel and set it aside for now. During this time, we'll move on to our cinnamon filling, which starts with a half cup of softened butter, 1 cup of packed brown sugar, followed by 2 tablespoons of ground cinnamon. These ingredients will now go into the mixer with the whisk attachment this time, and we'll mix them on a medium-high speed until they're all well combined. You should end up with something like a smooth paste. It'll probably look a little grainy at first, but keep going until it becomes a uniform paste looking something like this. It's important to use softened butter. This makes it easier to spread onto the dough. I probably should have left my butter to soften a little bit more, but I got a little impatient. It worked out in the end anyway, you'll see. And as you can see here, our dough has doubled in size, so now it's ready to go on to the next step. So now I'll put down some more flour, put the dough on top. I kneaded the dough for a couple more seconds, just trying to get it into a rectangular shape. This was just to get it started for when we roll it out. So once the dough was in the proper shape, I put some more flour down on the surface as well as on top of the dough itself. This is so the rolling pin doesn't stick to the dough when we start to roll it out. So now we're going to roll out the dough flat into as close of a rectangle as we can get. The rectangle should end up being about 12 inches on one side by 16 inches on the other. And the entire piece of dough should end up being around 1/4 of an inch thick. You want to make sure that you're rolling out the dough evenly. so you're not ending up with any thicker or thinner parts compared to the rest of it. It should look something like this at the end. Next, I put my cinnamon sugar mixture on top. It came out in chunks, I think because my butter wasn't soft enough. This made it more difficult to spread with the spatula, so I ended up using my hands, which softened the butter as I went along. It's also possible to do this by spreading the butter across the dough and then adding the cinnamon sugar mixture on top of that, but I prefer to have everything already mixed together like this and spreading it out as evenly as I can. So this ended up taking me a few minutes, but I eventually got there, and at the end I thought it looked pretty good. Even though some spots might look a little bit lighter than others, it'll melt and fill in the gaps as it bakes. So now we'll grab the long edge of the dough, the 16-inch side, and we'll slowly start to roll that up. Getting it started is the hardest part, but once you get going, you can pick up the pace, keep going, and you'll end up with a roll like this. So once it's all rolled up and sealed and doesn't look like it's going to come open at all, it's ready to be cut up into the individual cinnamon roll pieces. Make sure the knife you're using is sharp so you get nice clean slices through the dough. I'll take a second and show you what the inside should look like. Looks pretty good to me. So my method to get evenly sized cinnamon rolls is I cut the initial roll in half, cut those halves into halves then, making quarters, and then cutting each of those quarters into 4 individual cinnamon rolls. So if that was too complicated for you, you're going to end up with 16 individual cinnamon rolls. Now that the rolls have all been cut, grab a baking sheet with parchment paper and place the rolls on top. You might want to throw these in the oven right now, but nope, we actually have to cover these and let them rise for 30 more minutes. But this is okay because we have one more thing to prepare, the cream cheese frosting. For this, we need half a cup of unsalted softened butter, 8 ounces of cream cheese, 2 to 3 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and 2 cups of powdered sugar. Now using the whisk attachment on the mixer again, we're going to combine all of these together, starting at a lower speed and then picking up the pace until it finally gets nice and creamy. If your butter and cream cheese were soft enough, you shouldn't end up with any lumps. After the 30 minutes, you can see that the cinnamon rolls have gotten a little bit bigger. The last thing I do before putting them in the oven is brushing them with a mixture of heavy cream and milk. This will help keep them from drying out too much so they come out nice and chewy at the end. Now we finally put them in the oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for about 25 minutes. The 25 minutes are up, let's take a look. As you can see, they puffed up even more while they were baking, pretty much filling up the entire tray. They are a great golden brown color with the cinnamon filling spread evenly throughout. Let's grab one and take a look. These came out pretty great if I do say so myself. Now let's cover this in frosting and it's ready to go. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and like the video so you can save it for the future. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in another video.